don't have headphones.
I think we're good.
Okay. My dogs are gonna talk.
It's all right. They have something to contribute.
That's nice.
All right, should we get started?
Yeah, this is my trust issues. I have to double check that we're recording, even though it said we're recording. And
Well, I mean, from history, it wouldn't be the first time that we were under the impression things were being recorded.
Yep.
And they weren't.
Oh no.
Oh yeah.
It was like,
but anyway, I'm Jillian. I'm here today with Shannon and our special guest, Emily. Hello, Emily. We're going to get started with the goods. What is your recovery date? What are you in recovery for? And a fun fact about yourself.
Nice. Well, thank you both for having me. So yeah, I'm Emily. I am in recovery from eating disorders and I am sober from substances. My sobriety date is May 18th, 2016. I kind of have to think about it because I had a lot of different sobriety dates. And then I don't have a specific recovery date for my eating disorder. And I'll tell you why really briefly. So mainly because food stuff can be very elusive. And they also have a really strong, like, perfectionistic component. And I feel like if I were to choose the day that I did food stuff and body stuff perfectly, I would never have come into recovery. And I can talk about that more a little bit later, but in general, I don't really have one, and that works for me pretty well. And fun fact, okay, I don't even know. I feel like a fact that I kind of come back to that is kind of pertinent to my life story that I'll get into shortly is I'm the middle of 7 kids. That's not super fun, but that's a fact. So we'll go with that.
it's a big fact.
I always forget about you.
I know. I give off only child vibes, I feel like. A little bit.
So I'm just curious, how many boys, how many girls?
So I have 5 sisters and 1 brother.
Holy
lucky him.
I know. We all feel pretty bad for him.
That's funny.
He's the oldest though, so he got out of all of our hair the fastest, so exactly. He's okay.
We can't give him too much sympathy.
Exactly.
So give us the background, where it all started, what happened, and where you're at now.
Yeah, do you want to give me a time constraint? Because I could either do 5 minutes or I could do a lot of minutes. So
well, let's go with a lot of minutes. Let's keep it we've been doing hour.
Yeah.
A full hour about me. Oh gosh. Okay.
Yeah. Huh.
All right. So I'm going to try and keep it more to I don't know. I guess we'll see where this goes essentially. So like I said, I'm the middle of 7 kids. I feel like growing up, I obviously was always really trying to get attention in different ways, which I think is very normal to a large degree. I think there's a lot of beliefs that wanting attention is a bad thing. And, especially as a child, it's duh. I think that's inherently deserved in a lot of ways. But obviously there was a lot going on in my household. My parents had a lot to manage, and there's just, general chaos of living in a big family. My parents also really valued education. So schoolwork was really important. Playing musical instruments, doing after school activities, all this stuff that I'm really grateful for in a lot of ways. Also started to build upon that pressure that I put on myself to always accomplish, always do really well. I had older siblings that were also really successful in a lot of areas. So I felt compelled to also follow in their footsteps in an effort to make my parents proud, which again, I think is a very normal thing that humans do, children do especially. But looking back, it definitely made me feel like my worth was directly contingent to how well I did in school, how good I was at different sports, how much I stood out, and how how exceptional I was based on other people's standards. And I just ended up really internalizing that. We ended up moving, I think at like a pretty like developmental stage of my life. I was in like just about like starting to go through puberty-ish, like 7th, 8th grade sort of stuff. We moved from West Virginia to Vermont, and I was actually really psyched about it. There was a part of me that was like over West Virginia for many different reasons, and I was just like excited to go somewhere new, start over. I feel like a little bit of that, like, I don't know, just like a little bit of a geographic, although obviously I didn't know what that was when I was little, but just like really excited to like start somewhere new and like reinvent myself, which like also didn't really happen because I was a child and like didn't really know how to do that. But around that age is really when eating disorder stuff came up. And just as like a little disclaimer, I won't go into any details about anything. I'll keep it pretty vague, just to like protect people who might feel triggered by that stuff. But so I started engaging in different behaviors more around like end of 8th grade. And looking back, it was such a way to try and garner control over my life. Obviously, as I mentioned, it felt very chaotic. It felt like just I wasn't doing enough. And like, obviously the infiltration of like media and there wasn't really social, well, I probably had like MySpace or something, which probably wasn't healthy for my developing brain. But, you know, like an influx of stuff that was like beauty. And of course, going through puberty, coming into this age of like, oh, I am wanting to step into like this concept of womanhood in some way. And I don't really know how to do, like, I was just like very confused in a lot of ways. And naturally ended up moving towards like wanting to pursue a certain body. You two know I am a very tall person. I've probably been around this height since I was in like 7th or 8th grade, and just always felt like very awkward, very uncomfortable in my body, not knowing what to do with my hands, like just that kind of stuff where I was like, I don't know how to sit in this chair. Like it just feels strange. And so then became this just, I don't know, like compulsion to like shrink myself and be smaller. And again, I think a lot of that had to do with the dynamic at home of just like really just getting the message that I was a burden. And I'm not going to put any blame on my parents either. Like they absolutely did such a good job with like what they were given and all of the kids that they had. But that was like the message that I internalized myself, was like, I'm taking up too much space, too many resources. I need to shrink. I need to be smaller. And like, maybe then I won't be a problem, coupled with this part of me that was like, I want attention. I want to know that I'm worth something, that I'm valid. And like, so it just, was a very strange combination of factors playing into that. And so anyway, so eating disorder developed, combination of like societal factors and like also the mental illness component of like wanting to control the environment around myself and control how people perceived me by controlling my body. And that kind of continued, it like hardcore continued for a really long time. So into high school, I was still pretty like straight edge. This is a little messed up, but I think also kind of true in that, like, I really think my eating disorder prevented me from going deeper into my alcoholism, because I was just like so afraid of calories and of losing control in any sense. Like it did not seem like a good time to me to like not be in control of my body. And so thankfully delayed that for a little bit, but eventually towards the end of high school, started going to parties and stuff. And that was a big experience for me, and like feeling what I thought was like deep connection with people. Because again, like there was just a part of me that like didn't feel super connected in a lot of ways. My family didn't really talk about emotions or like hard stuff. Like there wasn't, at least to me, like there wasn't a lot of vulnerability. And in the moments when I had expressed vulnerability, I'd always felt like it had been shut down. And so in my mind, like as a child, especially, I was like, okay, like it's not safe for me to be honest. It's not safe for me to talk about how I feel, because that's not going to be received in a way that feels supportive to me. And again, just to say, like, people around me did the best that they could, and like this is not to blame them at all. But that was just kind of my experience of like really want connection, and I'm finding these people who like it's easy to feel connected to when we are drinking. And also like I am still very close friends with a lot of people that I went to high school with. So it wasn't just that superficial like partying connection sort of thing. It was also deeper than that. And still I maintained like a level of functionality throughout that. During high school, I ended up like, my mom totally knew what was going on with like eating disorder stuff. And I was just like in complete denial phase. I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. Everything is fine. And of course, I mean, at that point there was social media. And so of course I was on like all the terrible blogs that like tell you how to like, you know, convince people that you're fine. So I knew all of the things to say. And so I kind of coasted for a while, pretty like undetected by people outside of my family. And my family just didn't really know how to handle it. Like I went to some therapy sessions. I was going to this doctor regularly, totally like just blatantly lying to her about like all sorts of stuff. And just created like a lot of frustration for my parents, which just like breaks my heart at this point for them. And also for me, because so much of it was like this terror of, I can't live without this thing. Like, how am I supposed to go through the world and like, God forbid, trust my body, trust myself to like be okay around food, trust like any changes that could happen in my body. Like I was so insecure and so dependent on my body as like my sole sense of self-worth and validation. And so even through that, like there were moments when like my eating disorder would like wane a little bit, but then of course it would always come back. And so it was mostly into college. So I ended up going to college in Florida for a little bit. It was like a small private school. So like not actually like a big party school, which I actually really liked. And at that point, like I was still doing really well in school. It was a really nice culture at that school because all of my friends did really care about academics. Like we'd do all our schoolwork and then we'd like go and party on the weekends. And it's just so funny to me because I remember specifically one friend who, and we were like, I don't know, 19, 20 at this time, like she would have like wine Wednesdays and like do her homework. And I just remember thinking like, how are you doing your homework? Like, how is this possible? And like, it's hilarious to me now because like fast forward a year and a half and I'm drinking every day. I can't even like go grocery shopping without drinking. I can't go to like the farmer's market with my family without drinking. Like it just, the acceleration of it is just really interesting. And I think that's in part because I was more so dependent on my eating disorder at that time. And yeah, so anyway, so I ended up going to school in Florida for a year and a half. Second semester of my sophomore year, a lot of shit was hitting the fan. And without going into too much detail, like I was like, I need to leave. I have to get out of here. And I was just so self-consumed at that point too. So I ended up leaving the school and like, didn't tell the school, didn't tell my parents. Like, first of all, like, I didn't even know what that protocol looked like. And also I just straight up didn't care. I was like, I just need to leave this situation. So I like sold some stuff, packed up my dorm room, moved to New York City, all within like, I think I made that decision in like 2 weeks or so. Like it was a really short amount of time that I was like, okay, I'm done. And at that point too, in this semester, like I had been flying back and forth to New York City, and had missed like a bunch of classes. Like I was just like, I'm done here. And so I packed up and left. And like a week or so into me being in New York City, this part also just like makes me so sad. My parents were obviously trying to get in touch with me, and I did this sort of thing many times throughout, like when I was using, of just like radio silence. Like I would not answer their voicemails, I would not answer their emails. I don't know, I might have even like blocked them at some point, I don't know. But I ended up getting like some like text or email from my dad at that point that was like, Emily, your school just called and they said your dorm room is empty. Like, where are you? What is going on? And I can't even remember, like, I think I might have told him that I was in New York City. I really don't remember. But so anyway, so I get to New York City on like Easter of 2012, I think, and ended up lasting 2 weeks there until I had like a complete like mental, emotional, spiritual, physical breakdown. Like I was just like sobbing in my bedroom. I hadn't left my apartment in probably days, maybe with the exception of like going out to bars or clubs or something. But my world was like so small. And I was just like feeling so out of control with my eating disorder. Like that's all that there was. There was like my eating disorder during the day, and then like getting blackout drunk at night. And thank God I only lasted 2 weeks with that, which, spoiler, like there's actually a lot more to come. But that time was my first realization of like, I need to go to treatment for this. Like I'm not going to make it if I keep doing it. Also, like, little side note, I was like very obsessed with psychics at this time as well. So I was calling this like poor woman named Penelope. Well, I mean, I like paid her a lot of money, so like we don't actually have to feel bad for her. But I was like calling this woman on at least like a weekly basis, maybe sometimes more, and just like begging her to tell me that I would be okay. And it was interesting because one of our last phone calls, she was like, Emily, like I get the sense if you stay in New York City, something really bad is going to happen. And to this day, like I do believe in psychics to an extent. I also believe that there are a lot of people who capitalize on that and like aren't the real thing. Regardless, I ended up leaving, which I think was a good thing at that point, or I left for a little bit. So I ended up going to treatment. And I mean, quite frankly, like, I don't think I was really ready. I think I was just in a desperate need of a break from myself, and just really wanting to be in a safe place where like people would give me permission to eat and permission to just relax, and a reprieve from drinking, of course, too. And so I went to treatment inpatient for like a month or so, and then promptly went back to New York City to do outpatient, and also to literally revert right back to everything I was doing. And long story short, I ended up lasting there like another, I don't know, handful of months or so, and then called my dad and begged him to come pick me up and bring me back to Vermont, which he did. And I think it was a really good move for me to get out of New York City. But then things just progressively got a lot worse. I started feeling a lot of nostalgia and regret for leaving school in Florida. Like I was, on social media, seeing all of my friends, like having a great time, and like going through school and just living their lives. And I just felt like I had made such a mistake. And at the same time knew like, well, like I simply could not have continued going there. I actually tried to go back at one point, and my doctor at the time was like, you're not ready. You can't safely go back to school. And I remember being so angry at her for that. And again, in retrospect, like I'm so grateful for it, because I'm sure I would have just obliterated everything yet again. So living at home, a few months after I came back from New York, I turned 21. And that was really when like things got worse and worse and worse. That's when I started drinking almost on a daily basis. My parents eventually, I was living at home at that time, and they eventually were like, you have to move out. Like, you're setting a horrible example for your sisters. And so I moved out, and just continued a lot of the same stuff of like drinking, taking advantage of people. Like, it's just, yeah, just a lot of like darkness. My eating disorder was still there. And I just felt like incredibly stuck. And Shannon, I'm wondering if I can share a story about you.
Yes,
Do you know this story I'm going to share?
Yes, I
Okay.
do.
Okay, amazing. So I had like the absolute miracle of meeting Shannon at one point. I was volunteering at this place, and essentially like for all the wrong reasons. Like, part of me was like, well, if I'm volunteering, then I'm not an alcoholic. Like, I'm still a good person. I'm still functioning. Like, everything's okay if I'm doing this. And because I was just like stealing a bunch of their food and using their laundry facilities was really like the incentive to be there. But at one point I met Shannon, who was cooking like a family style meal. This place had people come in to like make family style meals for the families that were staying at this facility. And we got chatting, and I forget like the details of it, but I think it was just like, so like, what brought you here or something? And you told me your experience and what had kind of brought you there. I won't share your experience. I'll let you do that if you want to. or I can just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, you can totally say, whatever.
You say it.
Yeah, I got a drug possession and I had to do community service to make up for everything. And so I went to that, and that's where we met. And yeah, I told you everything.
Yeah. And it was just like so mind blowing, because I had like, so as a little detour, like I had a couple attempts at like unaliving myself. And so I ended up in like the psych ward at one point, and they brought a like 12-step meeting into there. And I was like, there was a part of me that was like, okay, like this is resonating a little bit. But there was also this big part of me that was like, but I think like I had the stereotype. I was like, I think this is just for like old people. Like, I don't think people like me, like my age, do this sort of thing. And so that's why it was just like so monumental when I met you, because I was like, holy crap, another young person who's like really cool. And so you ended up bringing me to my first meeting. And I remember so vividly, like we met in this parking lot and you were with your boyfriend at the time. I like walked down to meet you two, and you two were just like hysterically laughing and just like embodying this joy and appreciation of life that like hung over me. Was like, what the fuck? Like, what is happening here? How is she so happy if she's not drinking? Like, what is this? And I don't remember anything about the meeting. I remember where we went, but I just like, it was like, that is what really stuck out to me, was like you, and also you sharing your story of like, to me, what felt like the end of the world, of like getting in trouble with the law. Like, oh my God, like my life would be over. I couldn't handle that. And just to like see you go through that and come out, like maybe not necessarily the other side. I'm sure you were still like processing and dealing with a lot at that point too, but to see you having these moments of joy and just like generosity and openness with me was just, it was really transformational. Not transformational enough to like stop me from drinking, because I did promptly drink after that meeting. But it planted like a really, really important seed for me, that was just like this exposure to someone else who is like me, who was in the rooms. Unfortunately, it took me quite a bit longer, at least like another year or so of just like getting into mischief, like burning shit to the ground, messing up relationships, to really like more seriously come into the program. I ended up meeting someone maybe later that year. It's a little foggy, maybe the next year or something. And I met him. I was going to explain how, but it doesn't even matter. Very random way. Anyway, I met this guy, we started dating, and it was also right when I decided to go back to school, another attempt at like this geographic of like, I'll just go to school and then like I'll have to stop drinking because I'm going to live with these new people, and like my eating disorder will get settled down, and like just this absurd illusion that simply just changing my environment would change everything about me. And I do actually think there is some value to changing environments, but there also has to be so much deeper work than that, which I was not doing. So I ended up going to school for literally just a month, and then had another meltdown. Ended up leaving school yet again, and ended up eventually like I ended up going to treatment again then, actually. And then moved in with this boyfriend at the time. We eventually ended up moving to New Hampshire. And at that time, like I once again started relapsing. I'd kind of been like more involved in 12-step stuff, but I was still like very dependent on this one individual as like the sole reason why I would be sober, because I knew, I was like, if I relapse too many times, like he is not going to want to be with me. And I had relapsed quite a few times. And of course, every time, because he was sober in his own way, like would be very understanding, would always like, try and comfort me. Thank God with most of those, I think pretty much almost all of those relapses, except for the last one that I'll get to. I would drink one time and then I'd be like, oh, I messed up so bad. Like I need to jump back on the wagon, like do all this stuff again. But I was just doing the same thing over and over. Wasn't super involved, but like enough, like going to meetings and like working the steps sort of thing. And so we moved to New Hampshire, kept drinking. Eventually, like he gave me that ultimatum and was like, if you drink again, this is over. And because I was deeply ill in my head that just meant I needed to hide it better. And I didn't do that because like you can't really do that when you like don't know if you're going to drink and just like fall asleep in bed, or like if I'm totally going to black out and like cause a scene. And like it was so unpredictable at that point. And so I did the latter. I completely blacked out. It was a mess of a situation. He broke up with me, and that was probably like one of the most terrifying points in my life, of just feeling like I had ruined everything and there was no redemption from here. I ended up going to treatment again. That was kind of like, it didn't really work out. Long story short, I like kept drinking while I was in this like, I don't know if it's like technically a halfway house kind of thing, but we'll call it that for simplicity purposes. And then had another unaliving attempt, and like that was really like my final like breakdown. So I ended up once again going to like longer term treatment, and was kind of still trying to get this person back. Like my sobriety was still pretty contingent on like, I don't know if I made this up in my head too. I was like, I think he said, if I stay sober for 3 months, then we'll get back together. And so I had this like 3-month thing in my head, which now I'm like, 3 months is nothing. Like, what was I even thinking? Like I continued to relapse for 3 months after I got out, more than 3 months actually. But anyway, so after I got out, I, kept relapsing a little bit. And there was just a moment where I'd reached out to someone for the first time. Usually when I would relapse, I was under the impression that nobody could help me, that no one could make me feel better, that it would be a waste of my time and theirs. And the fact that I just wanted to feel numb. I just didn't want to feel what I was feeling. And I didn't want someone to encourage me or like force me in some capacity to feel what I was feeling. So I remember it being like a really big moment when I actually reached out to someone, and they talked me off of that ledge. And also within that conversation, I really realized like, I have to let go of this person. Like I can't be dependent on this person at all anymore. And there was like a little sense of relief with like a lot of grieving mixed into that. And I just feel so grateful for that too, because it was such an integral step to me getting sober for myself. Like, I don't think I could have done it if he had been like, yeah, okay, like you can come back, like you're good enough now or something. Which I don't think he would have done, because I like really messed stuff up. But yeah, so from there, I, got far more involved in my sober community, met a lot of other young people. I'm really, really grateful to have been able to get sober where I did, because I wonder sometimes, I'm like, if I had been in like, I don't know, like Northeast Kingdom, Vermont, like would I still have stayed so, like, I don't know, like it's just really interesting. And I'm just so grateful to have been here and be surrounded by so many other young people. And yet, like at that point, I really was compartmentalizing things. So I very much like put my sobriety in the forefront, and it was like, look, everyone, like I'm doing so great because I haven't drank. Meanwhile, like my eating disorder was still like very much raging in the background. And that continued for many years into sobriety, of like, kind of trying to get a handle on things, but really now I know like those attempts were more just disordered behaviors. Like I wasn't using one set of behaviors, but I was using another set that I thought was like less dangerous. But it was all the same, really. And so yeah, so struggled with that for a long time into sobriety, which just felt terrible. Like I had this sense that I was just like living a lie. And it's also just like really fascinating to me, because even when like every time that I would try to get sober again, there would be this like little voice in me that was like, you're gonna get sober, like you're relapsing like all the time, but like you can do this, like you can totally do this. But with my eating disorder, I quite frankly was like, I don't know if I can do this. Like I don't know if I'm going to be a grown-ass woman with like maybe children one day, and I'm still going to have to be trying to like manage and hide this, and like I just didn't know if it was possible. And So anyway, so I had been very fortunate to be able to get like support with that in different ways, like therapists and nutritionists and whatever. But none of that really stuck until I started doing actually like my gateway into intuitive eating, which I'll elaborate on a little bit more shortly. But my gateway into that was doing like social justice work. So looking at like anti-racism work. And then I found just like a whole new world of information that, and I remember so vividly, I was like, why the fuck did no one tell me about this? Like, I've been in treatment so many times. I've had so many therapists. I've like been to so many dietitians. Like, why did no one say anything like about this to me? Which, like, in all fairness, they very well might have. I could have totally just been like completely blocked off to it. But for whatever reason, like finding it out this way, maybe it's just because like I found it on my own that I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the thing. It was absolutely mind blowing. It was just this framework and philosophy that I had never heard of before, and was just like such a complete game changer of everything that I thought I knew about, like not everything, but like most things that I thought I knew about like health and food and bodies and all that kind of stuff. Like was so different than like the reality of things. And it's interesting too, because I went to school for holistic health and alternative wellness, which was very, to put it bluntly, very elitist, very like organic food only, like make sure that you're always going to like your naturopath and getting Reiki. And like, it was just, I mean, like stuff that honestly is really cool and incredibly beneficial to a lot of people, but just like this perspective on health that had no groundings in what the reality is for the vast majority of humans on this planet who like don't have access to those resources, who are experiencing discrimination every day, who are living near pollution, who don't have healthcare, like just all this stuff. Like I didn't really learn about when I was in school. And so the anti-diet movement, intuitive eating, and health at every size were like really, like I said, just like mind-blowing frameworks and philosophies that I had no exposure to before. And I remember feeling just like so hyped up about it, so like angry about it, like everyone needs to know about this. Like there's just such a sense of urgency of like people need to know this stuff and they don't know it. And like that's really messed up, because I know personally the like misconstrued information that I had been fed my entire life led to a lot of disordered personal behaviors and experiences, let alone the way that I was judging other people and treating other people. I mean, I guess I wasn't terrible, but like, you know, like the mental judgments and like, especially coupled with my education of like, oh, I just need to help this person, like, you know, find the perfect meal plan and like get them in an exercise regime. And it's like, first of all, I was like not fucking qualified to do that. This was just like mental dialogue that would happen. And it's like horrifying to think back on of like how absolutely ignorant I was. And just to say too, for other people who might be in that place, it's not entirely our fault. Like we are spoon fed from diet culture, this culture of belief systems that our bodies are wrong, we're terrible people, we have to look a certain way. Like billions and billions and billions of dollars are funneled into that sort of marketing. And so of course we're going to soak it up and believe it to an extent, if that's like pretty much all that we see in the world. So yeah, so that was the big transformation that kind of brought me into a much more compassionate way of relating to my body, and a way of relating to food in a way that I didn't think was possible. I think it's interesting too, because like the abstinence model worked so well for me for substances. I mean, so well, I just told you about like the billion relapses I had. Eventually it worked really well for me. And like to this day, like I don't really have to think about it. It's not an option. I don't need it. I, you know, have a lot of other stuff going on in my life, which I'm grateful for. And so I thought I could apply that to food as well. And so I was in different 12-step groups, which didn't resonate with me for, you know, different reasons as well, not just the abstinence-based model. But when it came down for it, that was still a form of restriction for me. And it was a way of controlling and manipulating food, because I didn't trust my body, and I didn't trust like how my body might change as a result. And I thought that I would lose control. And intuitive eating addresses all that. It addresses like these periods of feeling out of control are likely a result of restriction. that it takes a long time to rebuild that trust with our bodies. And so there might be quite a long period of time, there was for me, of like feeling pretty out of control with foods and like having to just sit with that and like get curious about it and like find it. Thankfully, I had this foundation of sobriety and a lot of tools that I learned along the way to care for my mental health, and to reach out to people, thankfully, and that sort of stuff. But it's different from substances also in the sense that we need food to survive. We don't need like alcohol, drugs to survive. Also, like substances are mind altering, whereas food, not necessarily so. We could get into a lot of that I feel like some people might argue about, but like generally food does not like put us into a completely different mindset. And so that took a little bit for me to like wrangle my mind around as well, of really starting to believe that, because it felt like early sobriety at first. Like it felt like that tiptoeing of like, I don't know if I can do this. Like maybe this whole thing is bullshit. Like maybe I should just go back to the safety and comfort of like the sad little world that I was living in, because I know what to expect there. But I think too, there was just like a more overarching, like what I was kind of alluding to, of like, this is bigger than me. This is so much bigger than me. Like me harming myself is proliferating this cycle of like making us smaller, not taking up space, not allowing ourselves to, and not just me, like a thin white woman still, but like everyone, like minorities affected by this, entire groups of people that are oppressed because of the way that their bodies look. And so that was that was like a really big motivating factor. And like, okay, like I'm gonna stick this out. And the reality is like that process was really, really challenging. And it was, I would argue, easier for me than for a lot of other people who, you know, like I said, I'm still in a thin body, even in recovery. Like it is easier for me to talk about trusting my body when like my body is still socially acceptable. It can be a lot harder for people whose bodies do drastically change as a result of intuitive eating. So I just want to offer a lot of compassion for that and not sugarcoat it. Like it is challenging. There's still so much work that needs to be done. And like, hopefully my experience can be helpful to folks. And also like my experience is my experience. And I can't guarantee that everyone's going to have like the same experience as I did. But I feel like that was a long little tangent. And now like, please ask me some questions so I can fill in all the blanks.
That was the most amazing tangent I've ever heard.
Yeah.
I didn't know all this about you. Like I don't think I've ever really heard your story. So it was really nice to be able to hear that. And the way that you talk about your body and saying, I couldn't trust my body. Like, what? I just never heard it that way. And it really brings up some emotions, you know, because I too deal with an eating disorder and am in active recovery for it, and I have never been able to trust my body, and I guess I've never really recognized it in that way. So for you to say that just brought up a lot.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think that was like the biggest barrier for me. And in general, I mean, also like I was talking about like reaching out to the psychics, like I literally did not trust myself. I was like, I need something divine to reassure me that I am okay. Because I didn't have any of that. And it's a really beautiful practice within intuitive eating. So I guess first I'll explain intuitive eating a little bit. So it is essentially a practice of 10 principles that allow you to restore your trust with your body, redevelop attunement with your body. So this ability to tune into different emotions, sensations, like hunger, fullness, obviously, in the body. Whereas like diet culture teaches us like, don't trust your body, only eat these certain things, don't eat these certain things. And I also really want to specify too, intuitive eating can incorporate like medical and ethical restraints. Like if you're vegan, if you are, you know, allergic to different foods, like that can absolutely be a part of intuitive eating as well. Because I mentioned like the abstinence model didn't work for me, but like obviously if you have medical stuff, that can be integrated into it. And so there's different aspects of, you know, rejecting a diet mentality, these parts of us that tell us that we should or shouldn't eat certain things, that like we need to go burn off certain foods if we eat too much, making peace with food, so allowing ourselves to have foods that were previously off limits. And that's a really just like wild practice, something that took me, like I said, like a long time to really like integrate and embody, because it's really scary allowing yourself to have foods that, you know, you haven't had in like quote unquote healthy ways. And that process allows you to remove the power that those foods used to have. So there's a big aspect of like neutrality here. So there's no good or bad foods. There's no like junk food. There's, you know, all food is food. There's all food fits is like a phrase that intuitive eating folks throw around. And food is more than just fuel, which was also mind blowing to me, because there's a big narrative in my own mind of like, I should only eat if I like literally feel hunger pangs, which is one form of hunger, but there are a lot of other forms of hunger as well. And just learning to see all foods as the same. And in the process of doing that, people are better able to determine what they actually want. So like there are periods of like maybe really wanting like a certain food for a long time because you haven't allowed yourself to have that. And then eventually through a process called habituation, you get sick of it. Like if you have enough of something, you're like, okay, time to move on. Like I'm over this thing. And so that's a big part of it. There's like an emotional component of it, learning to cope with different emotions, tuning into hunger, fullness, satisfaction, finding joyful ways of moving, respecting the body. There's like a little bit of body image stuff tied into that too. And then the aspect of gentle nutrition, which is usually the last concept that that comes in intuitive eating, just because it has the potential to like kind of turn into diety stuff. But nutrition is important.
Sorry, the dog taking over the couch.
Oh no.
Willow straight up was like, I am gonna sit where you're sitting.
Willow is here for it.
He just straight up pushed me out of the way.
Oh,
I scared you.
Well, all of a sudden she was like behind me. I was like, oh, what's happening? Oh my God.
I love this whole intuitive eating concept because I have never heard of something like this. You know, I definitely through the, you know, therapy that I've done, I've definitely have a different relationship with food. You know, I'm not putting good food and bad food in categories and stuff like that, but it just like what you're talking about brings it to a whole different level. And how does someone that has fear foods just like pick it up and eat it? Like that blows my mind to be able to just go out and now pick up fear foods. I mean, I'm able to do it through a year of therapy, but like if someone were to do this, how would they start?
Totally. So I would definitely recommend working with someone if possible. I did not really, well, I ended up getting a therapist like halfway through my journey with this. But definitely get some support. You could also work with me. I do food and body image coaching. And an aspect that was really helpful for me too was getting really into the social media community of anti-diet intuitive eating. I learned so much from so many people, reading a lot of books about it. I pretty much like dove in headfirst and like immersed myself in that world pretty much every moment of the day, like listening to podcasts, reading books, like social media accounts, all of that sort of stuff, which was like maybe a little bit too much in retrospect, but like whatever, it got me to where I am today, so that's fine. So definitely getting support with that, because like I said, it can be it was terrifying for me to like really move through these levels of trying to trust myself and not really knowing what that looked like. Like I said, I had some like kind of idea of it because I had been sober for a while, but also just there so much can come up in that process. And it's just really helpful to work with someone who has been through it and who has like studied, like I'm about to finish my intuitive eating counselor certification. So like studied this material really thoroughly as well. So I would definitely recommend getting support. There are intuitive eating counselors. This is how I found my therapist. The intuitive eating website has like a list of counselors based on area that people can find as well. but yeah, I would definitely recommend doing it with support. And then more specifically, I kind of alluded to this concept of, or I didn't allude to it, I said it, this concept of habituation. So habituation is this frequent exposure to a certain food. So I'll give you an example. So I was like really into Cheez-Its for a while. I would have Cheez-Its in my bedroom because like I didn't want anyone else living in my house to eat them. So I like had my little stash, which can kind of like, sometimes food stashes can be like a tricky thing. In this case, it was like, I want to make sure that I have this at all times, which is part of habituation, which also requires a level of privilege because not all people can afford to just go out and buy exactly what they're craving and have that on hand at all times. I did in this case. So I had like my box or two of Cheez-Its that I would have like pretty much every day. And I would allow myself to have an amount that felt good. Sometimes I would have a little more than necessarily felt good, and that's okay. And so habituation and like this concept of making peace with food, which is one of the principles, also incorporates this aspect of developing attunement. So starting out, a lot of people, I'll speak for myself, I did not have a lot of attunement. Like I said, I thought hunger only meant like literally feeling my stomach grumble. I didn't realize that it could also show up in like fatigue and, thinking about food pretty often, of, lack of concentration, it can show up in a lot of different ways. And so for me, a lot of it showed up as like thinking about food a lot, because I had been in this consistent state of like not having enough for like a very, very long time. And so my body was doing its job to like replenish the reservoir essentially. And so I would allow myself to eat that food. And then there's also a really important component of that that refers to mental restriction. So mental restriction is essentially you're letting yourself physically eat the food, but there's still a part of you that's like, oh, I ate too much. Oh, I'm terrible. Like, oh, I need to like go work out and burn this off, or like I need to skip a meal to make up for it. And so challenging that voice is a really big part of habituation as well, or in general, just like making peace of food is like calming yourself down, allowing yourself to know, like, my body knows what to do with this food. I don't have to earn it. I don't have to deserve it. Like, I can simply have it. And this is how I'm like teaching my body that it can trust me. Like, it knows that this food will be available at all times. And eventually that knowledge of like knowing that the food will be available makes it less enticing as well. Because then I, eventually got to a point where I was like, I mean, I could have another like serving of Cheez-Its, but I think I'm good. Like, I'll just have some tomorrow. And another important aspect of that is ensuring that I was like eating consistently in general. Like, if I didn't have lunch and like went for the Cheez-Its, like, of course I was going to probably eat the whole box. So making sure that there's like consistent nourishment throughout the day as well is a really important element of that. So yeah, that's what I would say is like, in kind of a nutshell, that was like a very summarized version of what that process looks like. But that's kind of how it works. Like, choose one food, maybe two foods, depending on what they are. If you can, like, if one's a snack and one's a like meal, but like if one's like carbohydrates or something, you could probably do both of them in a day. But yeah, that's what I would recommend for that.
It's a great explanation. For me, everyone knows I had an addiction to Oreos. It was bad. And I would binge, and just, I didn't think of it more so as like the eating disorder binge, but more so of like, I really enjoy these, I'm just going to keep eating them. But it was an eating disorder type of quote unquote binge, because and well, more so of like, I realized once I went through therapy that I was not nourishing my body. I was not getting the adequate amount of nutrients, protein, and everything like that. And so my body craved that sugar. It craved it. And so that's where I would literally just binge, because I was starving. I was so hungry, and my body needed something. And at that point, yeah, sugar, cookies sound much better than a bowl
Totally.
of tofu or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and you just explained something like very fundamental in our body is when we're in a depleted state. Also, this can be associated with sleep deprivation as well. Our bodies are craving energy. It wants energy immediately. So yes, like, sugary carbohydrates are going to be the first thing that we go to. That's our body's main source of fuel, are carbohydrates. So it makes total sense that you would resort to that too. And it could, maybe I'll go briefly into this. You mentioned like feeling addicted to food. Maybe you said being addicted. I don't remember. I do want to just say there's so much validity in feeling addicted to food. There's no basis of being addicted to food. Alternatively, we're all addicted to food because we have to eat it every day in order to survive. But that like compulsion component is like 99% of the time stemming from prior restriction, which you just alluded to, whether that be physical restriction, so not allowing yourself to have enough of certain foods, or that mental restriction of like, say you allowed yourself to have like that entire package of Oreos, and then you were like beating yourself up about it. And you're like, never again, I'm not going to have Oreos anymore. That's it. They're done. And in that process, you're putting these Oreos on a pedestal where like the moment something like emotionally shattering happens, or if you're in a place of like not having enough to eat, that's going to be the first thing you go to. So just to validate, like, yes, that feeling of addiction is very valid. And that's not actually how it works. Like biologically, we are programmed to go towards certain foods when there is restriction.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I was talking to Jilly before, and I was telling her the story of like how I met you, and I brought you to your first 12-step meeting. And then like years later, it was about a year, no, it was like 2 or 3 years ago, where we were all out to eating sushi. And I heard you and a few other girls talking about the clinic that we all went to. And I was like, tell me more. I have never heard of this. And you guys explained it all to me. And it took me about a year or two to get there. And I finally did. And so I just found it really ironic that like I brought you to your first, 12-step meeting, help you with, your drinking. And then you brought me to my first, so like our recovery definitely intertwined. And it was just really cool to think of.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting too with substances. What is it? People who abuse substances are like 11 times more likely to also develop eating disorders than the general population. Like it's so common within these communities. And it was for me too, of like, I had this thing for like my eating disorder starting out. And then it was basically like, this isn't enough. I need more. Like, I need more numbing. I need more like something. And then going on to the next thing. It's just like, that crossover is so common. And I think too, I remember that conversation, and I remember feeling so relieved by it, because for so long, I think that's why it was like really scary on multiple levels for me to like feel this urgency to start talking about all of this stuff that I was learning. And in that same process, I was like, in a way, coming out. Like I had at least you guys, I don't know what other people's interpretation was, but I thought I was doing like a really great job of just like seeming really like cool and collected. And like, I have totally such a good relationship with food, and like my body is natural, and like all of that sort of stuff that, who knows, I don't know how much people bought into that or not, but it was such a relief to even have that one conversation about it, and realize like, a lot of us go through this and it's really hard. And yeah, talking about it is, just such a first step in finding more of that connection, rather than such isolation and loneliness that addiction inevitably entails.
I love how you word it as coming out, right? Like my eating disorder was like the last thing that I came out about, right? Everything else, everyone knew, right? And then I really talked about it more so, came out when the podcast started. Like not many people knew, not many people knew I was seeing a therapist, dietitian or whatever. And it wasn't really until I started the podcast that I was like, word vomiting, everything of like, here, this is me being vulnerable. And this is me coming out of like, I've been struggling with this for years. So.
I feel that so deeply. And I honor you so much for sharing it. Like,
likewise.
It's scary. And also, yeah, I feel like I've done a lot of identity work in this past year, which maybe you can relate to with that too. I mean, on one hand, like we are so much more than just our bodies, and like we live in the fucking world, and our bodies carry us around that world, and people, judge us, value us based on our bodies in a lot of ways. And for me, like, obviously my body changed, not to a very large degree at all, but there was a lot of like dissonance with that, and trying to, I think so much like self-worth work came up in that process, and really like questioning a lot of like, I went through a weird phase with yoga, because I taught yoga for many years too, and really loved it, honestly. But even when I was like going through my yoga teacher training, there was this part of me that was like, I don't know, like, does the yoga world need another like lanky white woman in this sphere? And ultimately I stopped teaching like last October, just with like COVID stuff. I was like, I don't love teaching Zoom, and I miss seeing people in person. And like, I'm going through, I don't know, just like questioning how much my identity was associated, like my physical identity was associated with my worth, or like the things that I was doing. And especially like in the yoga sphere of realizing I can step away for a little bit, and I'm, letting other people take my place. Plenty of yoga teachers out there who can, fill in for me, and just how much of that played into like how I viewed myself and my self-worth too. Like, I wanted to be seen in this certain way, and it was a little scary letting go of that, and the association that I perceived people had of like people who are yoga teachers equal like XYZ. And coming back to what felt more authentic to me, which was like not taking up that space. And of course that might change, we'll see, like as things go back in person. I don't know. Currently I'm more into like the meditation world, but even like that was an interesting step of like, okay, I valued myself so much for doing that thing, and like, what are other values I can come back to, which has been like a really big practice for me lately, and like body image work that I do with clients as well, is like, let's establish what we value in life beyond like producing or succeeding or like looking a certain way, but like, what are the things I really value? And for me, that's authenticity, integrity, following through on commitments, being reliable, of like vulnerability, and like stuff like that really reminds me like, these are the qualities that I want to embody, like not necessarily like making a certain amount of money or like doing a certain thing, but like that, because like that's what I value in other people too. Like I don't look at like you two and I'm like, I don't know, you're having a bad hair day, don't think we can be friends, like I just like, I don't do that to other people, so why am I doing that sort of stuff to myself? And I think it's like just a really helpful way to remind ourselves of like the things that are important to us. So the identity part is just, it's been an interesting journey, and I'm sure it'll continue to change in a lot of ways. But yeah, like when we speak out about stuff that we've like kept secret for so long, it can feel so scary. And yet like, even I really learned like there are a lot of people who have that same experience, and it is so empowering to hear other people sharing about that. So again, like I really appreciate you for even having this podcast too, of like giving people a space to just be really vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, likewise, thank you for opening up and doing the work that you do. We've excuse me, for throughout everything I'm in recovery for, I felt like I was silenced, just with the stereotypical norm and society playing a role into it. Like I wasn't able to voice myself comfortably because people more so say they're not educated on the alcoholism or drug addiction or eating disorders, right? We're not taught that stuff, and so there's a lot of judgment, you know what I mean? So I always had this fear and this need to be silent because I didn't want to make other people uncomfortable. But in turn,
I get that.
Yeah, in turn, I'm making myself really uncomfortable, and it's like, whoa, like what do I need? What do I want? And that was to podcast, for a platform for people to be comfortable to share.
Totally. And I think it's so interesting too. I was just talking to a close friend about this before this podcast too, because kind of along the lines of what you've been saying, a little bit of like kind of a tangent, but this part of me that again has been doing a lot of like identity work and also acknowledging the immense privilege that I have in, you know, being a thin, like cisgendered white woman in this world. And how do I show up in a way that isn't taking up space from people who, you know, from minorities or like people who haven't been able to share their voices, and how do I be an agent of like also lifting them up and like allowing them to be seen and heard, meanwhile validating my own experience. And I feel like that's just been like, since starting my business, like this is me getting like very, very vulnerable. It's like, it has been so hard for me to like find the balance of that. And especially with like social media as a primary way that I advertise my business right now. And the goddamn algorithm is like not conducive to like me not showing my face. Like people do not give a shit unless like it is my face pretty much, which like is so disappointing because I feel like I love the things that I share basically and like research and like statistics and stuff that I found super valuable when I was starting out with this stuff. But that challenge of like, I'm trying to not center myself here, and yet like nobody sees my stuff when I don't center myself. And not that it's like all about engagement or like likes or anything, but like with having a business, there is like, Jilly knows, like, you know, Shannon, like you want people to see your stuff in order to garner more of that engagement and a higher potential to help people. So that's been like a really interesting thing that I've been wrangling with, of like, how do I take a step back and really celebrate and honor and uplift all of these people that I've learned from, who don't perhaps like fit the stereotypical mold of like what people think that they want to see. And I say think what they want to see because like society tells us that only certain like bodies and people deserve celebration, and I don't think that's right. With this aspect of like, and I'm trying to run a business and like want to help people, and I can't help people if like people aren't, you know, seeing my stuff. And it's just like an interesting like, yeah, dilemma that I've been trying to work with too, of like really feeling so grateful to have been able to connect with so people because of sharing my story, and how do I balance that with like so many other factors that are going on in our world right now. And the truth is like, I don't have the answer, and if anyone has the answer, let a girl know. But it's just, yeah, it's a process. And I think like what both of us are doing too is just like walking through it and figuring it out on the way. And I see this in you too, of like, and both of you, of like taking the steps, and right, like we've learned this, like taking the steps and like more will be revealed, and we'll have to learn more along the way. And maybe that means like, you know, getting some tough love here and there, and like staying true to what feels really important to us as well. Life is messy. I don't know.
It is. It so is. I mean, with your eating disorder, and I guess we could touch on with alcoholism or whatever, do you ever feel like you want to resort back to old behaviors, or do you feel yourself sometimes or at some point like, oh, we're going back to that restriction?
Thankfully, no. Not in terms of like actually engaging in anything. I think it is completely normal to have those first automatic thoughts, like almost like a little whisper in my mind sometimes of like, oh, these pants that I love don't fit anymore. Right. But at this point, like I almost pay them no attention. Like it's almost like, I don't know, like a little dog like scratching on my leg, and I'm like, buddy, get down, like calm down, let's like go have a snack, like go play outside, like you're gonna be fine. I think, yeah, I'm just at a place where I've done a lot of work on challenging those voices to the point where I don't have to challenge them that much. Like I'll notice something like that coming up, and because of like me really working on embodying my values and wanting to show up in the world as like this certain person that you know is compassionate and kind and doesn't judge other people, And like, I have to work on that with myself too, or I have to apply that to myself too, which I think has become a lot more natural over the years. But I mean, it's totally normal to have like tough body image days. Like I have like a specific cozy outfit that I resort to on days when I'm like, I'm just not feeling this today. And like, that's okay. I'm not going to like force myself to be in something uncomfortable. I'm not going to force myself to like, just like I do what I can to make it easier for myself, and knowing that like my body is also like a fraction of the person that I am, and I deserve to be comfortable. I deserve to still show up in spaces, and like it's okay if I just need a cozy day at home as well, and I can still treat my body with respect. I can still, hydrate, get enough sleep, eat consistently. Like I don't have to punish myself anymore for it.
Isn't it
So yeah,
crazy, the mindset that we have now versus like when we were inactive,
Whew. Yeah. Like
So
just thinking of how mean I was to myself too. Like I was actually thinking about it the other day where I was like, I literally don't think mean things about myself. Like, of course, there are moments when I'm like disappointed that I could have, handled a situation better or something like that. But it's not from like a self-deprecating place. It's from a like, okay, girlfriend, like this is how we can handle this in the future. Like you did your best and you could have done better. So like, that's where we're at. Let's move on. It's not like that dwelling in the spiral of like, I'm not feeling comfortable in my body today. I'm such a piece of shit. I hate everything. I should just like disappear, like that just so quickly snowballing into like complete self-hatred doesn't happen anymore, which is like really cool to acknowledge.
Mhm. Definitely.
Yeah.
So, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I've had the pleasure of working with Emily in her business in regards to the mindfulness practice, because that's something that I really struggle with. And so I don't know how we're doing on time, but I'd love to just hear more about your business and like also like the mindfulness piece too, and like what you offer there.
Yeah, totally. So since working with you, I've restructured things a little bit. So I predominantly do food and body image work. Before I was like offering some like yoga meditation stuff. But I'm really focusing on food and body image work, which is integrated with obviously intuitive eating, body image, and the mental component is a huge piece of that. You heard me describing like mental restriction, like our relationships with food is largely mental in a lot of ways. And meditation is an important aspect for me in cultivating more of that awareness and that mindfulness. I'm trying to think of, I feel like we did a lot of different meditations together, Jillian. And I'm not I mean, this was like 9 months ago, so I'm not surprised I don't remember them specifically. But there are a lot of different types of mindfulness essentially. And they're, in terms of meditation, like guided meditations, are a great place to start for folks. I really like affirmations and mantras. They can feel super fucking cheesy, but for me, like that was a big part of my early sobriety. Actually, I would like go through this whole long like chakra mantra meditation that I'm pretty sure I just like found on Pinterest somewhere. But it was a great way to like start to subtly reprogram these belief systems and these automatic thought patterns. At least that's the way that I think about it. Is like I'm planting the seeds like in meditation when my body is calm and my mind is settling a little bit, and I'm focusing really specifically on these different concepts and qualities and things that I want to pursue. That's like planting the little seeds so that hopefully like when I'm in my everyday life, like moving through the world, that can kind of start to come at first. Like those will start to surface a little sooner. And I found that to be true of like when I mentally am working towards consciously being kind to myself, it becomes a little easier to like physically like actually follow through with those behaviors in real life as well. And sometimes it's vice versa. Sometimes it's really hard for me to change my mental state, and it's easier for me to be like, I'm feeling like crap today, and I know the things I need to do. I know I need to like I'll go for a walk. I'll like reach out to a friend. I'm going to, have breakfast and like the basics that I know I need to do, even when my mind isn't necessarily like feeling super motivated or activated. So I think it can go both ways, but the mindfulness piece I think is a really important part of, especially like getting back in tune with ourselves and our intuition, of being able to sense in our bodies what emotions feel like what our gut is telling us, which is something that I was just like so disconnected from. Like I probably was like 23 the first time I had any semblance of like connection between what I was feeling in my body and what was happening in my mind. Like I remember a therapist when I was in high school asking like, what are you feeling? Like what emotions? And like where, like I saw a biofeedback dude at one point, and I was literally like, I would just like make shit up because I did not know what to tell him, which is like one of those things. It's like going to the eye doctors and like memorizing the eye chart and just like spinning. It's like, that wasn't helping me to tell this guy like, oh, I'm feeling this here. And like, why was I trying to please him? I mean, of course I was, because I was like a sick individual, and just wanted to people please. But yeah, so I lost my train of thought with that, but mindfulness, yes.
Yeah, I can so
There we
relate.
go.
I like that, like when I'm like working with my therapist, like the first time that he asked me, like, where do you feel this in your body? I'm like, well, I don't, what a dumb question, right?
Mhm.
Like, I don't know. Why does that matter? Right. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's something that I continue to work on. Like, that concept of like
Exactly. Yeah.
thought and like where you're feeling it. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah. And feeling safe in our bodies too is like
Yes. Yeah.
so challenging, right? Like especially with those of us who have experienced trauma. And like, I'm not saying intuitive eating is going to fix that in and of itself. I definitely encourage people to get support in other avenues if they have access to that, because like we have been trained to distrust our bodies, to not feel safe in our bodies, to trust external sources over our own bodies. And it takes a lot of work and practice to get back in touch with ourselves and to really start to trust ourselves. So yeah, it can definitely be a really rocky process of getting to that place. And also say like it ebbs and flows at times. And I think where I am now too, I often come back to being able to trust myself, like most of the time, including those times when I know like I need to check in with someone else and I need support. Like for me, that is a level of trust of knowing like I don't got it. Like I gotta reach out to someone else who like hopefully can guide me through this, because I am at my capacity. I'm at my wit's end. Like I need some sort of guidance here. So yeah, so I think that support is really important as well. And like that is a little qualm that I have with some 12-step like I don't know, so, like spaces that I've been in before, is just this like really aggressive distrust of ourselves, of like my literal least favorite phrase in the entire universe is that I'm actually probably going to butcher, but something along the lines of like, your mind is a bad neighborhood, like don't go there alone. And I'm like, literally like, how bro, like how am I not supposed to be in my own mind? Like no one else can actually be invited in there. Like seeing our minds as an enemy is really not helpful. And I think it's interesting too, because there is a spectrum, right? Like when I came in, I really couldn't trust myself in a lot of ways. Like I was very just like very sick, very like felt like I was helpless, like so many ways. And so I needed that like really like constant support and guidance from certain people. And like, I would hope that the point is for all of us, like everyone in the world, to come to a place of being able to trust ourselves and not needing to continuously put all of our trust and hope and resources into other people, right? Like there is a balance there. And like, I don't want to be afraid of being with myself. Like that concept is just like so sad and tragic to me. And it just like breaks my heart when I hear people talking about that sort of stuff. And usually in like a joking way too, which like makes me more angry, because I'm like, it's not funny. Like it's not funny to hate ourselves. It's not funny to be afraid of ourselves. Like I think there can be a healthy level of apprehension about perhaps our intentions, perhaps like deciphering our intuition from fear. Like there is obviously a lot of nuance with that. But like what I hope in working with people especially is to get them to a place of like not needing me anymore. of like, I'm here to guide you and like show you a path, give you the tools, and like, you are fucking capable and you can do this. And like, you know, depending on how long people have struggled, like maybe that requires more support. But like, I think we're just, you know, it makes sense to me too of wanting to stay in that like small little place of being able to like rely on other people for a lot of stuff and like not having to take responsibility. And I think there could be a lot of reasons for that. Obviously the safety part, you know, fear, like a whole bunch of things. But yeah, I think there also needs to be that emphasis on like, we're capable people and like we can trust ourselves. And, you know, that might look a little different for people and take a lot of time, but I think it's possible. And two, I'll mention as well, like it's hard to trust yourself when living in a society that constantly tells you that your body is wrong, that you're not good, right? So like with a lot of like the systemic racism we have going on, with like the rampant anti-fat bias going on, like there's just, the world is telling all of these people that they're not okay in the bodies that they're in. And so again, to just emphasize, like, it is easier for me to say that for myself because I am not constantly told that like everything about me is wrong, right? So like honoring that as well of like, I'm not trying to diminish anyone's experience either, of like getting to a place of trusting and safety is, you know, dependent on a lot of different factors, and that can be very challenging to navigate. And for me, that's just like more motivation to keep doing this work because so much needs to change, and like change is not going to happen when we're silent, right? Like that's why we're here.
Definitely. Do you have anything else?
I don't think so. I just love you, first of
Oh,
all.
girl.
And yeah,
Thank you.
like, just like your knowledge, and you're just so like eloquent, and yeah.
I appreciate that. I had a headache this morning and I was like, I am not going to be eloquent. I'm going to be all over the place. So I appreciate that. I hope it made sense, most of it.
It did, and you're very well spoken. And
thank you.
In wrapping up, is there anything that you hope our listeners will take home with them?
I would definitely recommend not just learning about this stuff for me. So, you know, in our conversation, obviously we like touched on bits and pieces. If people are interested in learning more about intuitive eating, anti-diet, health at every size, there are so many knowledgeable people. I'm just going to like rattle off people off the top of my head. Aubrey Gordon is a great resource on Instagram. She's YR Fat Friend, your fat friend. She wrote a book called What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat. Sonia Renee Taylor is another great resource. She wrote The Body Is Not an Apology, which is like a beautiful short read of a book. She's like so poetic, highly recommend. Her name on social media is where you can find her. Sabrina Strings. Wow, I just spaced on the first part of her book. The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia. I let someone borrow that book, so I don't have the title. Fearing the Black Body is what it's called. The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia. Robin Zabogalski, you guys probably know Robin. She's another great resource for a lot of this work. Christy Harrison has a podcast called Food Psych that I learned. She interviews like so many different diverse people. Really great podcast to learn more about intuitive eating specifically. And I could honestly list people all day. So people can reach out to me if they want to know more, but I would definitely recommend people follow those folks as well, because that's why I've learned like the bulk of what I know. And yeah, and don't just get all your information from me, like learn from other people who have been doing this for much longer too.
Right. Well, lastly, where can we find you?
You can find me on my social media, and you can like all of my research-based posts so that I know people are appreciating them at em.poweredliving. So empoweredliving after the M. And then, yeah, my website is empoweredlivingwithemily.com. But yeah, social media. I also have a Facebook page, which is like I don't even know if people use Facebook anymore. I have a page. You can join me on that page. Not much happens there. But yeah, those are the places. I don't know when this is going to air, but I'm also doing a donation-based body image group starting Thursdays at 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. It's a virtual did I say donation? It's by donation. Half the proceeds are going to go towards the Association for Size Diversity and Health. And it'll be a little bit of meditation, journaling, discussion, pretty casual group, but hopefully just something to offer to folks and to give us a space to make friends with our bodies.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You have come so far, and it's so great to see the growth from when I first met you to now. It just blows my mind.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful to have you on my journey, and I want to thank you for being on the podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Oh, I so appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Of course. We out.
We out.
We out. All right, bye.
Bye.